Okay, so now what we're going to be doing is checking whether this project already exists or not. Okay, so whether the path has already been used, whether the project name has already been used, anything like that. Okay, and so we're going to need to basically read from our JSON file, check what's already in there. So check the keys, for example, because that is the list of project names, and then compare it to what's happening over here when we're selecting, for example, our project path or our project name. Okay. So over here, once we have had the user select a path, but after confirming that the path is not just empty, because obviously that's the quickest thing to check is it empty? If so, then just exit, right? But if we can confirm, okay, it's not empty, but before we start using that path data as something useful and passing it into our other parts of the function, so this right here would be the perfect spot to do another check, okay? Simple check, is it empty or not? But now a bit more complex of a check to say, has this been used already before? Because if so, well, we shouldn't allow it. Right. So what we're going to need to do is loop through our dictionary. Now remember, we have this Python dictionary, so even though it's come from a JSON file, you need to sort of just remember that it is at this point an actual Python dictionary that we can loop through. Even if it is empty, we can still loop through it. It'll just loop 0 times. Okay, it is still iterable. Okay, so let's loop through our list, well, our dictionary, and confirm a few things. Okay, so we're going to say for, and because we want to check the keys and the values in here, we're just going to say for k, comma v in data.items. Okay, remember that data, well, so our dictionary dot keys will return an iterable list of the keys. Values will return an iterable list of the values, and items will return an iterable list of tuples where it's the key and the value are the first and second index of that tuple, and so when we feed it 2 variables, it stores the first index of that tuple in k, and it stores the second one in v. Okay, so in this way we're able to, when we loop through that dictionary, k is now equal to our key and v is equal to the corresponding value as we loop. All right. Now what we're essentially wanting to do is check whether our path, which currently is called path, okay, remember we only stored it temporarily there just to grab the directory name, but now it is called path. So we want to check whether path is equal to any of the items that are in this list, okay? But the paths, now where did we store our path? It was not the key, okay? We actually stored in our value, we stored a variable, well, a key called path, okay? Because remember, our value is the full dictionary, okay? Our key is the project name, but our value, v, is a dictionary in and of itself, okay? So that dictionary has keys and values in it. But we don't need to really loop through that. We know the exact label of what we are after. So we're looking for the path, which means if we feed it square brackets, right? So, but remember, this is our v, okay? So we're taking v, which is our dictionary, give it square brackets, and give it the string path like this. It's essentially selecting this key from the dictionary and returning this value. Now the value stored is actually the path that was set previously, okay? Right now we're comparing it to our current path, which came from our user input, but this came from any successful projects that have been added were stored using the path variable. Okay, so we're checking current path with previous paths. All right, and we want to check whether this is equal to that, and if so, then we're going to error again. Okay, and you know, do the repeat thing as well. So here we've set up a whole repeat, but we actually need to do that for our project path as well. Okay, so we can just copy this. So repeat is equal to true, then while repeat equals false, and then we're going to push all of this one layer in. Okay, so we're not actually going to loop this unless something errors and we force it to loop. And that's what we're going to do in this exact case. So we're going to say that if path is equal to that, and remember this is looping, okay? So it's going to check it compared to the first project that it finds in our project list. And then if it isn't equal, it's not just going to stop there, it's going to move to the next item in the list and the next item in the list. So path, which is our single variable, is being compared in turn to every single path that exists in our project list. Okay. Now, I'm sure you won't have like hundreds and hundreds of projects. I mean, if you do, then great, very successful company that you're running. But normally projects take a while. So like you normally have, you might have like 20 or 50. You might even have 200, but it's certainly not going to be so many that it's not feasible to loop through it. Okay, so this will be totally fine. Now, when we loop, if it is equal to this, what do we want to do? Well, we want to basically do what we're doing here. We want to give an error, and we want to set this to be equal to, we want to set it to repeat. Okay, so we're going to give a message, which is going to be something along the lines of the project path is already used by another project, something like that. And then maybe a call to action. So you sort of want to say, or in fact, what we could do is actually tell our user which project it's being used by. That would even be better. So instead of saying just by another project, let's say project path is already used by project, and then we give it a project name over here to tell them which one it is, right? So what we would do is we're going to format this because we want to feed it a variable. So and then we would do dot format, and then we'd replace it. Now remember, as we're looping, we've got k is our project name, so we can just use k over here, right? So we're using V for the dictionary, but we're actually using K because that's what they're going to remember it as. The user has specifically given it a project name. So we're now going to say, well, the project path is already being used by project this, and then we feed it a name, okay? And then we want to tell them to please select a different path or whatever, because then we're telling them why it's going to pop right back up and ask them again, okay? So we can put that on maybe a new line. So I would give it a new line. And then I'll say here, please select a different path. Right. So that's our message that we want to print. Then we print that message. And then we also do a who.display message, and it's an error. Okay. And then we set repeat to be equal to true. Now here we don't want to continue because we're inside of this loop. Okay, yes, we're inside of this while loop, but if we continue here, it's going to continue in this loop. Okay, because we're in nested loops, so we can't just continue from this. So what we want to do is we want to break this loop, because if it's equal to any item in that list, we already know there's a problem. We don't need to check every single item. If it is equal to the first one in the list, then we can save ourselves some time and stop it right there. Okay. So what we'll do instead is that once we exit this loop, we're just going to check, because we will have set repeat to be equal to true. So instead of continuing and setting our project name variable, we can just stop here. I mean, I know it's only one line, but it could be hundreds of lines of code. And so after this loop, once we've broken out, we want to at least break completely out of this loop and continue into the next iteration. Okay. So we will just say here, if repeat, because we will have set repeat to be equal to true. So now we say if repeat, then continue. So now it will not even reach this line or even the hundreds of other lines we could write after this if this first check fails. Okay. So that's going to now pop back up. But there is a bit of a problem here. Okay. And I know it might not be immediately apparent, but through lots of errors and testing or whatever, I can tell you that the one issue with checking paths like this to say if this path is equal to this other path is the slashes, forward slashes and backslashes, right? It's just a pain constantly having to work backwards and forwards between, you know, sometimes it's forward slashes, sometimes it's backslashes, sometimes it's a combination of the two. You don't know if maybe someone's gone in and altered the config file manually and so they've typed it with the wrong type of slash. It's a headache. So what I'd like to do is convert these two paths that we're looking at before assessing them to see whether they're equal to one another, because they could be exactly equal except one they've been typed with a backslash instead of a forward slash, and then the other one has the forward slash instead of a backslash, and now they will not be equal. So we don't want to do that. So let's convert these paths to use the same type of slash, and then we can always, once they're all using an identical slash, we can always just specify which one we want it to be. Okay. So because I know though that I'm going to want to do that probably again and again, because we're working with paths over here. So I'm going to actually build a separate function to do this. Okay. So up here, we're going to create a function, a brand new function, and then this is what's going to be used deeper down in our other code, right? Now we could define it just within our add project, so we can create another function within this, but then this function can only be called inside of the add project function, and I don't want that because I think in the remove project function we're going to also want to convert slashes from a mix of backwards and forward slashes to literally all the same. Okay, so we can call this something like fix path or fix slashes or whatever you want to call it, right? Now, I know I said before that until we know what we're doing, we will probably just leave all arguments out. But in this case, we know what we're trying to build. We're trying to build a very simple utility function to do something. I want to give it a path, and I want to convert them all to be the same slash. Okay, so like just all forward slashes, right? But sometimes I'm going to want them to be backslashes, so I'd like to build that in as a feature as well, where I can actually maybe optionally specify that it should be a backslash, and then it will convert that for me as well. Okay, so I know that I'm going to be asking the user to give me an old path, and what I'm going to return is the new path. Okay, so we're going to have that old path. So let's continue from there. We'll come back to that optional argument later on. Now the first thing we're going to want to do is take this old path, and then we're going to go and replace all all backslashes with forward slashes. Okay, so that's just a simple thing. Okay, now what I want to do is I'm going to store, because I want to take this old path, but I don't want to keep overriding it. Okay, because I want it to be preserved in case we always want to go and maybe check our new path versus the old. So instead of overriding, I create a temporary variable called path _path. Now we take our old path and we're going to run just a simple string replace function on this. Okay. And what I want to do is replace a backslash with a forward slash. But the problem with this here, let's just get this right. Okay. The problem here is that this slash counts as kind of an escape. Okay. So it's a special character that is escaping this function, this character there, which means that this is opening the string and then this is being cancelled or escaped. And so this is still part of the string, the comma, and the space is still part of the string, and then this is the end of the string, and then this is between them. This is not how we want it to be, right? So we need to escape the escape character, right? We need to escape the special character. And to do that, we put a second backslash. So even though this looks like what I'm saying is replace all double backslashes with a single forward slash, that is not what this is saying. Because the first backslash here is escaping this character, so this one is no longer treated as a special one, but this one is a special one, so it is not actually there. It's kind of invisible, right? So what this is saying is replace all single backslashes with a single forward slash. Okay. But that's not all, because what if we have something else? Like, what if we have double backslashes? Okay, which sometimes does happen, because sometimes we've had us in a situation kind of like this, where we've had double backslashes, one which is meant as an escape character, but then this string is fed in as a raw string, and so it treats them as two backslashes instead of a special one that cancels or escapes the other. So that can sometimes happen as well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to replace, and then we're going to do double backslash. But how do we do double backslash? Well, I'm sure you can guess. It's 4 backslashes, because the first one's escaping the second one, then the third one's escaping the fourth one, and so this adds up to 2 backslashes. Okay, and we're going to replace that with a single forward slash. Right? Now sometimes we could also accidentally have oh, hang on, sorry. Here we're replacing old path, but we shouldn't be. We've done one replace, so here we should actually just be replacing underscore path. And so we keep overriding our new temporary variable, but we have not overwritten old path. It's still there. We've done a replace here, but stored it in a new variable, and now we use only that new variable. Now something else that could happen is we could end up with a double forward slash. And of course we don't want that either. We want to just have singles. Okay, so these are the 3 situations that we wanted to get out of. Potentially having a backslash, potentially having double backs, and potentially having double forwards. Okay, and all of them have been replaced with a forward slash. And now what we can do is just return our new path. Okay, so let's maybe store that as a variable. So we'll say new path equals underscore path, and then we can return our new path. Okay, we don't really have to. We could just return underscore path, but it's nice to sort of use these temporary variables and then actually write out the proper variable, because if we wanted to maybe now compare old and new, we can. Okay, so there's our return new path. But this is not the only problem we come across with these paths as well. I don't know if you will have noticed sometimes, but when we get the paths, depending on how we've gotten it, whether it's been manually typed, maybe copy pasted from a Windows, like a window like this, if I control here, then there is no slash at the end, but maybe if I do it through the who.ui.select file, then it includes a slash at the end. There's a variety of ways, and so what we want to do is that if there's one slash at the end, if we're comparing 2 paths, so we say a equals my path slash something slash whatever, and then we want to compare that to b, which is exactly the same thing, but if there's a forward slash at the end, right, a and b are not equal. They will not be presented as equal. And so because that last one is also very unpredictable, we also want to go and get rid of that. Okay, so before we set our new path over here, let's continue working with it. So let's check our path. So we can say underscore path dot, and then we can check if it ends with. Now, of course, it could end with a forward slash or a backslash or double backslash or double forward. It could end with any combination of the 4 possibilities. But if we put it after this, they will have been replaced already. So we can predict that it is going to be a forward slash, if anything. Okay, so we check if the underscore path ends with a forward slash, then what we do is we just slice this like an array. Okay, so we're going to override underscore path, but we're going to override it with underscore path, and then we put square brackets, because remember we can treat strings like lists. We're going to put a colon because we want to select right from the beginning of the string. Okay, so we don't need to put 0 over here to give it the first index. We can just say leave it blank. But we want to select right up until the last character, but we do not select the last character. So in other words, we're removing just the very last character, only if it ends with a slash. Okay, and so now it's consistent. Okay, we could do it the other way around if you wanted as well. We could check whether it does not end with a slash, and if it doesn't, then we give it one. But I think this is probably the better way to do it, especially because we could feed it a path like this, which actually has a file at the end. Now, we don't want it to go and add a slash at the end of that file. So I'd say this is probably the better way to do it. We could run our function. If we know we want a slash at the end, we could run our function and then just simply add a slash because we know it will not have one. Okay, so this function is essentially about making our paths predictable, because it's really annoying having to work with them where some of them have forward slashes and backslashes and things like that. Okay, so there we are, right? So we now, here, let's just get rid of all of these lines. Spare lines. Okay, there we go. So this, and we get rid of our pass as well. This should be the majority of our function. The only thing is, this is consistently now going to return a path which has nothing but forward slashes and does not end in a forward slash. But what if I want it to be different? What if I want it to be a backslash? What if this needs to be Windows usable? So it actually needs specifically a backslash. Okay. In certain contexts do convert them backwards and forwards nice and easily, but others are very picky. So what happens if we want to feed it a different one? Okay, well, so let's build that in here. So I'm going to give an optional argument, and I'm going to call this new sep, right? So the new separator I want, but I'm going to give it a default, which is forward slash. So at the end, after doing all of this replacing, when we know that we've replaced all of it with a forward slash, right? And we've removed this one or whatever, so it is all consistent. And so basically it's 100% predictable that if there are any slashes in this path, it is a forward slash. We will now go and replace it, do one more replace function, so underscore path dot replace, and then we replace the forward slashes, of which they are all of the slashes. There will be no backslashes and no double forwards and no double backs, and we're going to replace it with our new separator, whatever that may be. In this case, by default, it is a forward slash, so this function is actually going to do nothing. Well, it's going to replace forward slashes with forward slashes, and nobody's going to know the difference. But what if the user now goes and puts in a different separator here? Well, at least we've gone and replaced all backslashes. So even if they wanted a backslash, for example, okay, we are essentially replacing all backslashes with forward slashes, all doubles with forwards, all double forwards with just a single forwards. We're removing the forwards at the end, so it's all predictable, and then at the end we go and replace all forwards with back. And so now they will all be backslashes, or all be double backslashes if that's what we wanted for some reason. Okay, and so this function should clean up our paths nice and easily. Now at the moment, we are using it here in directly in our script, but later we're actually going to take this and put it on a separate module of its own for utility scripts, okay, along with our error message. In fact, let's for now, shall we just go and create that error message function as well. So we'll use it in the script, but later on when we start working with multiple scripts, we're going to take certain functions away from this and embed it in a utility script. Okay. And it's totally normal to do this, to sort of work within one, and later you start splitting it up as you realize that certain functions are quite globally useful. You'll then offload those because you don't want to have to retype that script every time. Okay, so we're going to create our own error function because that's essentially what we're doing. Whenever we hit this kind of error, we want to basically print a message and display a message and allow the a certain severity type. Okay, so even though this is quite simple, I mean it's not really complicated, but still it is 3 lines of code. We're just going to replace that with a single line. All right, so let's copy from here. I'm going to paste that here, right? So then we're going to print. So the user is going to give us a message. Of course we want the user to give us a message. And we also want the user to tell us the severity type. Okay, but by default we want it to be maybe something like just error, because this function is error. So let's actually have the who.severity type error as the default. Okay, but of course if they want to do a warning, then they can. Now we don't have the message over here, we're actually asking the user for it, but something I want to do is actually I want to use the formatting, because when we print the message, you don't want to just print random things. You see, like here, when we have a proper error printed, it says traceback. It actually like tells you that it's an error, not only telling you what went wrong, but actually that it is an error. So up till now, like here, it says please fill in all fields, or FPS not set to a number, please enter a whole number, but we don't know that that was an error. It's not saying anything. It hasn't used the word error. So that's where we are going to fix it here. So because we're allowing the user to essentially select a severity type, right, we basically might as well use that severity type in here. Okay. Now, we essentially want to start our error message with the severity. So for example, if it errors, it would go error : and then give the error. Or if it's warning : and then after that follows the error. That's the sort of format that we want this to print in. So we're going to start this with the severity, right? Now I know we can put 0 and 1, but sometimes in these formatting it's a lot nicer to put the actual keyword, because then the actual the string makes sense when you look at it. We know that we want the severity : space and then the message. That sort of that tells us very clearly what it is that we're after. Okay. So we want to print that. So we don't want to store this as the message, because remember the message that's coming in here is going to be passed into our who.display message. But we don't want to swap that with now severity. So we're actually just going to be swapping this like this. We're going to directly print our message, but by appending the severity to the front of the message. And then in our display message, we're going to just display the message and feed it the severity from here. So we can, of course, go and swap this with our argument up at the top here. So we're going to take whatever the user gives us, or this as a default, and insert it in here, which is used as the who.display message argument. Okay. So now in here, we've got severity equals, and we've also got message equals. Okay, now the message is easy. That one just equals message, whatever the user has typed. But the severity, we don't want to print a whole who.severity type.error object. Okay, like if we do that in here in Houdini, let's just say foo equals who.severity type.error. Okay, now when I type foo or print foo, okay, you see that it is severity type dot error. That's not what I want. I'm just after that name. Okay, I'm just after that. So let's see if we can do that. So if we say foo dot, now you see there. So there is a name function that can be applied to that, and when we do that, it returns just the name of what is at the end. So that's what we're going to want to use in here. So we take the severity that is fed to us, so severity, but we say dot name. Okay. And now we're going to use this function instead whenever we were printing a whole message over here. Okay. So we don't have to do any of this. We're going to take that all away. We don't need to store it as a variable either. We just are going to say error and feed it our message. Okay. And then if it's not an error, if it's a warning or something like that, then we can give it the optional severity type, who.severity type warning or something like that. And then again, it'll print this message differently, where it'll say warning, project path is already used by a project or whatever, something like that. Okay. So now we've compressed this into one line instead of 3, but obviously when that has happened again and again and again, it's going to add up. Okay. So we're swapping this for error. And over here as well, same thing. We're going to swap this all for error. Now you see already in our script, and we're only done with one function here, we've used it 3 times. Okay, so this is going to save us a lot, right? Project name, what is it complaining about here? Oh, now you see it says project name might be referenced before assignment. Okay, because remember this, it's inside of a while loop, and the while loop may execute 0 times. Obviously we know it won't, but what if it does? So PyCharm will always complain. So this again is one of those things where I would just go and initialize. So underscore proj name equals none. Okay, just initialize it so that it doesn't complain here. Okay, because we need to make sure that there are no errors, so that if there is an actual error, we can see it and it stands out. Okay, so there we are. We've done quite a lot of cleanup, and so let's have a look. Right, so yes, we had created this fixed path function in order to be able to run on these 2 paths over here. And what's nice is now that it's an actual proper function, instead of having to run these multiple lines over here above path for path and for v path. Instead, we can just now run our function wrapped around this. Okay, because remember, our function returns the new path. Okay, if I hold control, by the way, over a function, it will actually show you the sort of the arguments for it. And remember, we created these arguments. And if you click on this, if you control click on it, it actually takes you to where the function is. Okay, and we can see here that we return a new path, which means we can wrap it around this. And so we feed the normal path in, it spits out the fixed path, and now that fixed path is over here. So now we can also wrap this one. Okay, and in fact, I think there's a cool way that you can do this, where if you have this selected, and then I think there should be a way to do it where if you type fixed path, no, okay. I think there's like a fancy way you can do it, where you can like have the thing selected and then it automatically wraps it around with the thing. I don't know. There's all sorts of cool hotkeys in PyCharm, but sometimes it's too many to keep track of. Okay, so now we can be sort of certain that this path that we're looking at and the path from our JSON file are being compared correctly, because both of them are having all backslashes turned into forward slashes, all doubles are stripped out, and the trailing slash has been removed from both of them if it had any. Okay, and so if these do come up equal, they truly are equal, and therefore it will complain that the project path is already being used by the project K, right? And that K is the key. All right. So we've checked here for our project path whether that is already being used. In fact, shall we, before we move on, let's just quickly test this. Okay, so because we've just built quite a lot, so let's do a quick reload proj. Okay, and then proj.add proj. Now you see here already even our error and fixed path are appearing, which is kind of cool. So we're going to run our add proj function. We go and choose a path, right? But you see there straight away it says project path is already being used by project 04 new test. Please select a different path. It also errors in here saying error : and then gives us the error. Now isn't that awesome, right? We can now see clearly that this is an error. It's errored over here. Fantastic. Tells us the project name that already exists. We're like, oh, hang on, whoops, we already created that. And after that, loops right back in, expecting us, or at least allowing us, to choose a new path. Okay, so now we can go and select that one, and it says, yeah, okay, that's fine. Right? So that's great, but now what if we go and give it the same name? Okay? Because that's not a great thing either. We do not want things to have the same name. So even though it's checked the path, it's checked this section to see whether it's identical and has found it to be true the first time, so it would not allow us to do it. But I could take this name and insert that as the project name, okay? And it will accept that, okay? And that's a problem, because now if I click OK, it's going to go over and overwrite that. Okay, so let's even double check if that will work. Let's type something else in here and go and set our FPS to 30. Okay, so now when we do that, come in here and check, and you see it has overwritten that project, right? And even though it's 04 new test, it's now here. You see, this is absolutely not, this should not be allowed, and we need to build our script so that it does not allow things like this. Okay, so let's do that. So besides just checking the project path, we need to also check things like the project name, okay, and maybe even the code, because the project name and code cannot be the same. FPS, of course, can be. You could have all your projects could be 25 FPS, but you cannot have the same name, because it's the key of our dictionary, and ideally your project should not have the same code either. Okay, even projects for maybe the same client or the same sequence, you know, like maybe you work on, like I said, the Lord of the Rings movies or something, you go and work on like 1, 2, and 3, sure, but they may have a similar code, but then they'll have a suffix which will have, you know, 1, 2, or 3 or something attached to it. Okay, so let's go and build that into here. Now, where should we put this? Okay, because we're setting our variables over here, like so. We're extracting the data that the user has given us. We're checking whether it's not empty. Okay, so that's an easy check. We kind of want to make sure that they haven't given us empty information first, so we can allow that check to happen. And then here we're testing whether the FPS is an actual number. We could do it between these two, or we could maybe even just do it after this. Okay. Sometimes there is no better or worse. It really doesn't matter, because we're checking 3 different things. But the first thing here, I think this definitely has to be first, because if it's empty, then there's no sense in even checking the rest of these. These checks may error out, because if FPS is empty, then of course it's going to error over here, right? So this makes sense to happen first, but this one and our next test doesn't really matter. Okay, so we'll just do it after here. So what we're going to do again is we're going to loop through our data.items. Okay, so we're going to say for k, v in data.items. Okay, and now what we want to do is check the project name. Now remember, the project name is K, right? So the current project name of the item that we're looking at is K, and then our project name is stored in a variable called projname. Okay, so we say if projname equals to K, then we want to error. Okay, for now I'm just going to put pass, right, and just so we can kind of do the whole thing, right? So we want to error, we want to set it to repeat, we want to do the whole thing. Okay, but also if not just the project name but the code, right? So if the project code is equal to, but then now we need to actually check the V, remember, because V is our dictionary, so we need to go into that dictionary, and remember our code is called code, like that, all capitals. So we say if our current code that we're trying to use is the same as a code that already exists in our dictionary, then again we're going to error. Okay, and this error over here, it'll be the same as this, where we need to error, set repeat to true, break, and then if repeat is true after this, outside of that block, then we're going to continue. Okay, so we can even copy that and just use it over here, right? So we error, repeat equals true, break, but then this if continue should be after the entire block, right? Which, remember, we're checking 2 things first, then when we exit the block. Okay, but if this one breaks first, it's going to break, and it's not even going to care about this, and it's certainly not going to look at the rest of the items. It's just going to jump straight to here. It'll find repeat to be equal to true, and so it's going to continue and not do the rest of this while block. Okay, now this happens to actually be at the end of the while block, so this if repeat continue is actually redundant, but I like it to be here because like I say, what if we decide to now add to the script and start doing additional things afterwards? Well, we want it to break at this point if it has broken here. So, normally in coding we want to avoid redundancy, but sometimes it's actually okay, because what it's doing is it's setting you up in future to be able to just kind of keep working with your scripts in a very robust way. Okay. So the only thing here is we want to run our error function, but we just want to give some slightly different errors. Okay, so it's not the project path that's already in use, it's the project name is already being used by project, but it doesn't matter if we're not going to say K, because we already know what the project name is, right? With path, it had a separate name that was unrelated, but in this case, it's just saying that the project name is already in use, so like something like that. Okay, so project name already in use, please select a different name. And then we don't need to do our format because we don't have anything inside of there. And then something very similar to this for our code. So we just select the whole thing. Project code is already in use, please select a different code. Okay. Right, and then now this should break properly. It's funny how much coding relies on causing things to break correctly, which is really funny. Okay, so we run this, we go and select a project. Here, new test, we say accept, right? Now, obviously that did not error because new test is not in this list, okay? This path is for this project, okay? In fact, let's cancel and go and clear up our project list, because this has become a mess, because it's got a weird separate path that doesn't relate to what we're doing. But with a robust script like this that actually has error checks and things in it, we should now be unable to mess up that config file. Okay, so we choose that path, we then give it a project name or whatever we want, and then a project code, and we say okay, right? Project name is already in use, please select a different name. That should not be the case, because there is nothing in the project list. Okay. Okay, so there's a bit of an error. Like, that's something we need to now look at, right? So it says that the project name is already in use. Okay, let's now go to our code and figure out where that went wrong. Okay. So it obviously threw up this error, which means that it was here. Okay. K is what we're looking at, and project name is being set here. Now, project name is what we chose in the input, but we don't know what it should, for in all intents and purposes, K should have been nothing, because there should have been nothing in the config file. Okay, so maybe it just needed to refresh. Okay, there is a chance that maybe it just didn't read and reload this config file properly. So maybe let's try there. Let's start with that. Let's reload, and let's click add again. Let's try add this project. And it doesn't matter the code, we're looking at the name. Okay, so that was just a bit of it hadn't figured out that we had cleared the project list, so that's a bit unfortunate. Right, so that works. We now have project name, project path, everything all set up. Okay, now let's try and break it. So we say, well, now let's add another project, and let's add it here to this project path, because I'm sure that's not used. Oh boy, it's now thrown up an error. Okay, so we can't store it there. All right, let's store it here. Yeah, it's happy with that. But then we go, okay, it says, please fill in all fields. Oh, whoops, sorry, I need to fill in a code. Okay, sorry. So let me go and fill in, maybe let me give it a new name. And I'm going to give it the name 04 new test. And we'll give it a code. All right. Project name is already in use, please select a different name. Oh man, this is really hard. Okay, well, maybe I'll just leave the project name like that. And then let's come up here and actually just cheat, and we're just going to copy this just to make sure that we do give it the same code. We click code, and it says, okay, project code is already in use, please select a different code. All right. But when we select a different code, it's funny how when I'm trying to put random numbers, like random letters, it always seems to come up the same. And then we click OK, and it will now accept. Okay, and now we come up here and our project list has 2 items in the list. Okay, so there we have it. This has been quite a detailed one, but you know, we're going to basically be you know, as we start going through all these techniques and doing things like this again and again and again, I will obviously not explain it in as much detail every time, because obviously then otherwise we'll be here for another year learning how to build this stuff. Okay, but we're going to essentially be doing a lot of this type of stuff, setting variables, doing checks. So you should learn this loop, the while loop. We're going to use that quite a bit, running our utility codes and sort of shipping stuff off to functions. And potentially later I'll show you how we're going to put this in our own utility script, but then also doing exactly that, just kind of offloading things to their own module and relying on those functions, user-defined functions. Running errors, checking for things. So after we create, we'll get data from our user, we always really assess it in as many ways as possible and make sure that what they've given us is usable to us. And then our ability to write to JSON files. So all of this type of stuff we're going to be using again and again. So I try to make sure you understand at this point, because in future I may just kind of show you and we're going to type each line and we're just going to go. Okay. All right, so thank you guys. I hope you enjoyed this one. Obviously, I will happily provide my scripts for you at every given stage. But you should be able to follow along. I mean, if you aren't here, I'll just kind of scroll up just slowly, just so you can kind of pause the video at any point if you're unsure. But really, if you followed along, that would be the actual best. Okay. Right, so I'll see you guys in the next lesson.